Good morning, Christ Connect Church. We hope that you are somewhere warm and cozy on this really cold January Sunday morning. We're so bummed that we can't be together in person, but felt like it was the best and right decision to keep all of you safe, to keep our volunteers safe in these negative temperatures. I don't know what these cold winter January days bring for you. Some of you may be feeling a little stir crazy as you're stuck inside with toddlers or teenagers. Some of you may feel the loneliness and isolation of winter. Some of you may be feeling warm and cozy as you're snuggled around your fire. Wherever you are in that spectrum, wherever you are on this January day, we want you to know that you are loved and seen by Christ Connect Church, that we are thankful that you are on mission with us. We are thankful that you are part of our family, and we love you, and we're glad that you're tuning in with us today. So, in just a few minutes, Zach will start a short devotional for us today. So it's kind of a standalone devotional, just a way to connect us as a family as we're in our own homes on this Sunday morning. We wanted to wait to continue our vision series when we were together in person because it's a big deal. There's a lot to unpack there, and we are so excited about how this vision weaves through the new life of our church. So next Sunday, January 21st, come back in person with us. We hope it's warmer. And Zach will continue that vision series, and that will go all the way through February. So thank you for being with us. As I'm about to hand it over to Zach, I want to just spend a second reading a small piece of a winter prayer for us. It's from this book. It's called Every Season Sacred. That's just a beautiful book that details how God works through all of the seasons. And here's a short prayer for winter. Oh God, creator of all seasons, we thank you for the wonder of winter as the earth is blanketed with soft snow. Help us to feel the warmth of your embrace. As ice coats bare branches, glittering in the afternoon sun, and Jack Frost nips at noses, comfort us with your love. A word who became flesh, when the world is cold, ignite in us spirits of compassion. Stoke the fires of generosity deep within our souls, so our family may reflect your light to everyone we meet. In Christ Connect, as a Jesus-centered church, that's our prayer in all seasons, that our family may reflect the love of Jesus to everyone we meet.
Thank you for joining us online. I'd like for you to take a moment and either think about this question, or if you're with other people right now, discuss it. And please actually stop the video, press pause, so you can have a moment to think about this or talk about it with those around you. If you had the opportunity to ask God one question and get a clear, direct answer, what question would you ask? Go ahead and pause the video now and think about that. As we thought about what question we would ask God, I want us to be thinking for the rest of this time about what question God or Jesus would ask us. There's several examples in the Bible and the stories in the Bible of either God or Jesus asking a question of a person. In fact, with the first story, the first humans that we know, Adam and Eve, they have this seemingly ideal setup, living in this park-like atmosphere, wanting for nothing, communing with God. God would take his walks in the cool of the day in this beautiful garden. And then many of us know the rest of the story. They eat the forbidden fruit and immediately become aware of their nakedness, which represents their shame. And they try to, in the time between they become aware of this, after they've eaten the fruit, and the time between God shows up again in the cool of the day to take his walk, they've actually tried to learn to cover up their nakedness. They've learned a new skill, sewing leaves together to try to make clothes. And then when they hear God walking, seemingly many hours later, they hide. And the first thing God says to them that day He asks a question. Where are you? And that might be a question that God has for many of us right now. Where are you? Might be a question Jesus would ask many of us. Where are you in terms of your commitment to me? Where are you in terms of your desire to have any type of relationship with me? Where are you in terms of your willingness to believe what I say and your willingness to go along with the radical things I ask of people? There's also a time when God asked the question to Elijah, what are you doing here? I think of questions that Jesus asked of people. Think about that moment when Jesus goes to the pool of Bethesda and in John chapter 5. And just the fact that Jesus went there is really compelling because that's where people gathered who were wanting to be healed, the sick and the lame. And Jesus goes out of his way to stop by there. A lot of times, many of us don't go to those types of places, but Jesus chooses to go there. And he meets a man who has been unable to walk for 38 years. And that strikes me in this season of life right now. I'm 38 years old. And so, as long as I've been alive, this person has been what we'd call lame and unable to walk. And Jesus looks at him and asks this question: do you want to get well? And I'm sure that that seems like there should be an obvious answer. But those of us who have reflected on the story, we know that that's probably not as obvious as we might think. And also, those of us who have had some type of sin or some type of even physical ailment plaguing us for a long time know that the answer is not as simple as the story might suggest at surface level. So maybe that's a question Jesus is asking of you today. When you think about some deeply embedded sin or some behavior in your life or anything else, your attitude, uh, withholding of forgiveness that you're carrying, Jesus might be asking you, do you want to get past that? Or are you content with where you are? I also think about that moment in the temple courts when Jesus was teaching at dawn and the early crowd had gathered to listen to him. And the Pharisees had this plan to use this woman as a pawn that they had caught in the act of adultery, maybe even the night before, maybe days or weeks before, and they've just been waiting for this moment. And they drag her into the temple courts in front of everyone, people she would have known in the shame and honor culture. And many of us know the rest of the story. You know, they bring her in and they say, Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says that we should stone her. What do you say? Jesus says, you know, if any of us is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone. And they all start to leave, the older ones first, and then the younger ones walk away. When it's just the woman and Jesus left, he asks this question: has nobody condemned you? And what's really cool about that story is when she says, nobody, sir, he says, then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. He doesn't say that she's not guilty. He says, I don't condemn you. It's like that beautiful passage in John chapter 3 and verse 17, where Jesus says, or where the text says, for Jesus did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to save it. And then I think about Jesus's question to his closest followers, who do you say I am? Maybe that's a question Jesus is asking of you today. Who do you say I am? And this is after he had posed the question, who do people say that I am? His followers said, some say Elijah, many examples. Then he said, who do you say that I am? Maybe that's the question when you think about what is the way that each of us live? What does that say about who Jesus is? What is the things we profess, the way we treat people? What does that say about who Jesus is? The things we actually verbally say about Jesus. What do we tell people about Jesus? Thinking back to another Old Testament example, I forgot to mention a couple minutes ago, this beautiful chapter of Job 38. Job has suffered more than any human ever should at the hands of the adversary, and has suffered loss, has suffered physically, and then he turns his anger toward God at one point, and Job chapter 38 is when God speaks to Job finally. And it's this whole beautiful passage of where were you when ... If you want to read something beautiful right now, then pause the video again and go and read Job chapter 38. Even though it's kind of intimidating in terms of what the tone God is taking with Job, it's also beautiful. The imagery of nature and everything, and God's creation, God's power. Going back to the New Testament, we'll mention one more question Jesus asks of somebody. And maybe this is the question that Jesus doesn't just have for you, but I think for all of us, regardless of one of these other questions resonated or not. Thinking back on that last meal Jesus had with his closest group of followers, there was that moment when Peter stood up and made the bold proclamation. We actually just, for those of you who were there this past Sunday, talked about this at communion. Peter makes this bold proclamation to Jesus. He says, I'm ready to go to prison with you or to die with you. And Jesus says, Peter, honestly, what's going to happen is that this night, before the sun comes up in the morning, 3 times you're going to disown me. And so that happens. There's 3 moments following Jesus' arrest in which Peter does deny that he has anything to do with Jesus. Jesus is crucified, put in the tomb, and as many of us know, comes back to life in the same body, the same flesh, the same body that was corpse level dead, had life brought back to it again. He wasn't there as a ghost. He wasn't there as some half alive zombie type of thing. It was Jesus, his living in the same body with the same broken body, really, with the same marks of the crucifixion and the torturing that he had been through, scars and marks all over his body, I'm sure. He ate after the resurrection to show that he wasn't just some supernatural ghost figure. And even though he was able to appear and reappear in places, he did that prior to the crucifixion as well. And then there's this moment finally when Peter and Jesus have this conversation. If you read it in John chapter 21, the heading says Jesus reinstates Peter, but what Jesus gets to later is kind of an ominous prophecy about where Peter's life is going to go. At the beginning of the conversation, Jesus asks Peter this question. He says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says he does. Jesus asks the question again. Do you love me? Peter says he does. Jesus asks the question one more time. Do you love me? And John tells us that Peter was hurt because Jesus asked the third time. Which I believe that the reason Peter was hurt was because the 3 times Jesus asked this question was a parallel of the 3 times that Peter denied that he ever had anything to do with Jesus. So maybe that's Jesus' question for all of us. Do you love me? And maybe his question is based on something like it was with Peter. Do you love me? So, as we wrap up this part of the video and the time of devotion, let's not only think about what question we would ask God, but what question does God have for us right now?